Here's everything you might have missed in the Legend of Vox Machina episodes 7 through 9. It's always darkest before the dawn, and things are getting awfully dark over on the Legend of Vox Machina. The animated adventures of Critical Role's first campaign continued as Vox Machina find themselves surrounded by death, destruction, and deep-cut references in the latest batch of episodes. With the final 3 episodes of Season 1 debuting this week, we're sliding in just under the wire with a roundup of all the Easter eggs and details that you might have missed in episodes 7 through 9. Now, as always, we'll endeavor to keep things spoiler-free for the events of Campaign 1, but we will have to talk about what's happened thus far in The Legend of Vox Machina. So if you're not up to date, well, leave now before it's too late.
This.
Alright, let's get into it, shall we? In episode 7, we learn a bit more about Percy's backstory, including how he got the inspiration to create a signature pepperbox weapon. As it turns out, it came to him in a dream, and it seems to be heavily connected to that darkness that surrounds him when he goes full no mercy Percy. But that's all we're going to say on that note for the time being. Next, we see glimpses of the horrors wrought on the Durolos by the Briarwoods, including a brief shot of Anna Ripley, who we'll meet in the final moments of episode 9. She's seen here riding an undead steed and riddles Percy's sister with arrows. Also during these flashbacks, we spot what appears to be the Matt Mercer lookalike character in this episode when Percy is walking on the docks. If you look closely in the background, there's someone who bears a striking resemblance to Matt Mercer. As for the names on the barrel of Percy's gun, we also get some answers about why there are only 5 names. It's heavily implied that the 6th name is for Percy himself, especially when you see his shadow point his gun at his head. Now, Percy actor Taliesin Jaffe once explained during a post-show interview that the 6th name on the barrel was intentionally left blank, because once all the names disappeared, 6 new ones would appear in their place. Who knows if they'll change that for the show, though? Only time will tell. Now, later we see Metal Gear Scanlan's plan in action, and it plays out almost identically to the chibi cartoon version of him from the previous episodes. It's a simple plan: sneak, chug, and destroy. And the Scantics that follow are the titular Scanbo in action, where this gnome bard turns into a one-man army a la Rambo and burns Vedmir's house to the ground. As Scanlan tries to escape the guards, he stumbles on a group of them playing what appears to be Dungeons & Dragons, or maybe more accurately, Bunions and Flagons, the in-fiction version of D&D that first appeared in the Grog's one-shot special. Inside Vedmir's trophy room, we see a couple of familiar-looking D&D monsters, including a griffin and a Kuotoa, aka those disgusting fishmen. We also see Chekhov's Triceratops skull on the wall once more, echoing the other Triceratops skull we saw in Gilmore's Glorious Goods earlier in the season. And this foreshadows Scanlan polymorphing into that rampaging dinosaur just like he did in the original campaign. In addition to facing off with Vedmir, Scanlan also has another challenging encounter with, you guessed it, a door. And that makes this truly the recurring villain of the series thus far. Sorry, Briarwoods, but there's you, and then there's a door.
Doors are such bull.
And last but not least for this episode, Scanlan casts lightning bolts straight from his junk, just as he often would in the original campaign. Moving on to episode 8, we catch up with Pike, who's struggling to reestablish her connection to the Everlight. After the battle with the Briarwoods at Sovereign Uriel's banquet, her connection to the Everlight was seemingly severed. Pike is in a chamber that amplifies her abilities and lets her channel more divine energy than your average cleric. And this helps explain how she's able to go astral projection Super Saiyan in episode 9 as well. Now, inside the astral plane where Pike attempts to commune with the Everlight, she finds herself face to face with a 3-eyed entity that drags her down into the darkness. This is most likely the Whispered One, the show's version of the lich deity Vecna, who imbued Delilah Briarwood with the fell powers needed to turn her husband Silas into a vampire and then command the undead. The 3 eyes in the darkness and the terrifying voice match what we see later in Delilah's spellbook and here in episode 9. Moving on, during the fight with Anders in his life-size Fullmetal Alchemist collectibles, we see some other prized possessions on display. First, we see a Raven skull, which is most likely a reference to the Raven Queen, another powerful figure who plays a major role in the events of Campaign 1. We also see what appears to be a bust of Ford, Travis Willingham's character from the Mighty Nine in Campaign 2. Critical Role fans may also recall there's an actual bust of Ford on the set of Vox Machina, their post-show talk show as well. Now we see a few other items here that are a bit difficult to discern. There's a large vase-like object that could be Grog's jug of alchemy, which was used for chugging beer and mayonnaise. Not like together though, because that's gross. It's like the white person version of a michelada. It's just extremely cursed. Don't do it. There's also a conspicuous looking winged helmet that I can't quite make out, and a horn that reminded me of Scanlan's Horn of Fog, which he used in the Gunpowder Plot episode of Critical Role Campaign 1, on which these episodes are based. Now with that said, if you know what some of these other mystery objects are, please let us know in the comments below. Towards the end of the episode, Keyleth casts a skywriting spell to create the Dorolo crest in the sky and signal that there's still hope for the people of Whitestone. And when the clouds part, they reveal Ruidus and Katha, the twin moons of Exandria. Ruidus is the smaller red one, and Katha is the larger white one. Among the villagers looking up at the night sky, we see a familiar-looking face that we glimpsed on our way into Whitestone previously. This is our Matt Mercer lookalike for this episode, and you know what? I bet he's just thinking to himself, how do I want to view this? And last but not least for this episode, when Delilah begins casting her Raise Undead spell, she uses a piece of residuum to enhance the arcane energy. Also, the first words Delilah speaks are Omen Drawn, and that may sound familiar to fans of Acquisitions Incorporated, because that's the name of the half-elf cleric played by Jerry Hawkins on the actual play D&D show of the same name. Alright, moving on to episode 9, we see the origins of Delilah's descent into darkness and being a terrifying necromancer as she quite literally follows the Whispered One's, well, whispers. Later, she then carved the symbol of the Whispered One into her arm as she turned Silas into a vampire, evidenced once again by his distinct lack of a reflection. The party briefly takes refuge from the undead horde inside of a tavern named the Crass Sailor, and this first appeared in Scanlan actor Sam Riegel's one-shot adventure Barroom Blitz. And yes, in case you were wondering, they also referred to it as the Ass Sailor in that one-shot. And speaking of one-shots, we see exactly that when Percy uses Bad News, his trusty rifle that we saw him tinkering with and using as a telescope in previous episodes. Here, Percy basically one-shots one of these undead giants, which has the unfortunate side effect of jamming this work in progress, which is, I have to say, bad news indeed.
Hey, do that again!
Wish I could. Sadly, it's still a work in progress.
Vedmir returns to the fray and attacks the party, and it's revealed that half of his face was burned in the fire that Scanlan caused at his house. Now, this could be a nod to voice actor Rory McCann and his most famous role as the Hound on Game of Thrones, who also, if you recall, had a burned face. Now, during the battle with Vedmire and Archie, we get another classic anime and samurai movie trope as they cross swords, only for Archie's torso to immediately slide off his body moments later. And speaking of badass moves, Pike finally makes her triumphant return as the heavens split apart and she does a superhero landing in front of the Sun Tree. Now, if you thought this looked familiar, this sequence bears a striking resemblance to Lilith's dramatic entrance in Borderlands 3 as well, right down to the sup.
Sup?
Next up, we get a delightful inversion of a classic X-Men move, the Fastball Special. In the comics, it was a combo attack referring to when Colossus would hurl the much smaller Wolverine like a meaty missile at their enemies. Here, the diminutive Scanlan uses his Not Bigby's hand spell to hurl the much larger Grog at a giant who's about the same size, I'd reckon, as a Sentinel. Later on in the battle, Vedmir gets stabbed roughly 45,000 times by the angry citizens of Whitestone. This is a marked contrast from the campaign where he survived to live another day rather than being torn apart by an angry mob. However, more importantly, among those stabbing old Veddy Boy is the same Matt Mercer character from the previous episode, thereby answering the question, how did he want to do that? And last but not least, Vox Machina comes across a mysterious woman in a prison cell. And if you look closely, she's missing a hand as well. This, as we'll learn next week, is Anna Ripley, one of the other people on Percy's list of names. Now, when they met in the original campaign, she was disguised as an old woman, but here it seems they're cutting right to the chase. As for how she lost her hand, well, let's just say it involves following in Percy's footsteps a little too closely. Anyway, folks, there you have it. That's everything we spotted in the Legend of Vox Machina episodes 7 through 9. With just 3 episodes to go in season 1 and a lot of ground to cover, we'll be waiting with bated breath to see how the Legend of Vox Machina unfolds this Friday. In the meantime, though, you can relive the adventures of Vox Machina for yourself by watching the entirety of Campaign 1 on Geek and Sundry's YouTube channel or wherever fine podcasts are served. For now, though, tell us, what did you think of the Legend of Vox Machina's latest episodes? Did you spot anything that we missed?
It's preposterous. Unthinkable. Incomprehensible. Oh, this.
Let us know in the comments below, and for the latest and greatest in the world of pop culture, stay tuned to Nerdist.com.